The other thing that's really cool about Carmel Mountain is that there was an enormous fight by environmentalists in the 90s to try and protect this place. As you can imagine, this land was owned by Pardee Construction. It's flat with those ocean views. I come here to this day and it's like, this is a miracle that this place is protected, because that's what was planned for it right there. And so it's about 300 acres, and I'll spare you the details of how it went down, but it really was a miracle of negotiation and deal making to get this place protected, and millions of dollars to get the land protected.
There's 300 acres preserved here.
Yeah, 300 acres here. And one of the cool things is that it's only a short distance from Los Penasquitos Canyon. You can't see it, just over the ridge there where the power lines drop down. Between us and those tall buildings is Los Penasquitos Canyon. That's a huge preserve. And then you've got Carmel Valley with the riparian habitat along the freeway. And then you've got Del Mar Mesa, which you also can't see. It's past some of the eucalyptus and houses that you can see in the near view. And that's another, actually you can see one dark ridge. It's kind of flat and dark just above this, or right below the furthest stadium lights. There's a dark ridge, that's Del Mar Mesa. And that's also a really special habitat area. So between all these areas, you've got kind of this network of preserves, and they're all connected by canyons so that there's, the coyotes can move around, bobcats, which is really crucial for maintaining the ecology of these areas, keeping the predators. So weeds can be a big problem, and they tend to follow areas of disturbance. So if you have areas that have been disturbed by grazing or off-road vehicle activity like this was, this can be the result. So one of the projects that the Conservancy has going is a cooperative project with the city of San Diego, because the city is the preserve owner here, and the Conservancy has been doing fundraising and work with the city to try and do a vernal restoration project and put back the native vegetation in this area. So we're going to actually do more vernal pools here, create some ponds, enhance ones that are here, take the weeds out, replant a lot of the uplands vegetation, and try to bring this area back to some of the more natural conditions that were here before.
Like that?
If you're in Kearney Mesa, you're standing on top of Linda Vista Sandstone. If you're at Balboa Park or San Diego State University, you're on top of the sandstone. All sorts of cool things about the sandstone, but one of the things that I like the most is that if you're right now we're on the Pacific Plate. That's part of the the tectonic system on the planet. And the Pacific Plate over millions of years has slipped north from Mexico. So California, the part of California we're staying in, used to be down next to Sonora, Mexico. And so many of the rocks and soils that are here that we're standing on came from mountains in Sonora, Mexico, hundreds and if not thousands of miles from here. And so there's this hard sandstone layer that when the rain comes and there's exposed sandstone areas that open in the chaparral, they pond because the water soaks into the soil and it can't get through that hard layer. It's like concrete. You'll see some where it's like hurt your knuckles hit. And so the water ponds, and over thousands or millions of years, there's all sorts of animals that have evolved to live in these little temporary ponds that happen in the wintertime and in the spring. Spring, that's the name vernal. Spring, vernal is for springtime. And they can start anytime from November. If the rains start in November, sometimes even October, and they'll go through when the rains stop. Water levels will fluctuate, but all sorts of cool life springs up in the pools. So there's plants that only grow in these pools that start growing as a seed when it's aquatic habitat, when they're actually underwater. And as the water dries up, their physiology changes. They actually become uplands plants where they can live outside of water in totally dry conditions. And there's several plants that are endangered. San Diego Mesa mint, you can actually smell it sometimes. It's so strong from the 52 freeway driving by Miramar. San Diego button celery is a spiky little thistle that grows in the pools. So there's several plants, and there's also all sorts of little crustaceans and vertebrates. So you'll get sometimes dragonfly larvae and these really special animals called fairy shrimp. And the fairy shrimp, I don't know if some of the folks are older here, you might remember the comic books, sea monkeys. You'd see them advertised in the comic books. They're basically brine shrimp that are from saltwater areas. These are freshwater. And they actually live all year during dry conditions as a little egg. It's also called a cyst. And that egg is just laying out here. It's dry, it's dusty, baking in the summer sun. No, it gets crushed. The weight of an apple can actually crush the egg. But usually there's enough of them that even with some trampling, sometimes they can persist. But it's still better to not have people walking right through. So when the rains hit, those things are just like, just add water. They spring to life, they hatch, and this fairy shrimp can actually go through its entire life cycle in 2 weeks. They mature, they reproduce, they feed, and then they produce the eggs or the cysts, and then they die off or get eaten, in this case, by all of these guys. So what's happened here is we've already moved through most of the fairy shrimp cycle, and the tadpoles have, these were frog eggs back in early December, and the water's been here since late November, and so the frogs have hatched, become tadpoles, and they've eaten most of the other little critters that are in here. So for all we know, most of the fairy shrimp that hatch in any particular vernal pool have been through the gut of a tadpole as an egg. We don't know, does that help their hatch success? There's all sorts of questions about these things, and believe it or not, there's actually people studying these things, studying fairy shrimp life cycles. Toads. They could also be tree frogs. And you come out here at night and it's just a din of frog calls. It's really cool. But they go through their whole, this stage of their life cycle that's aquatic, and in just a few weeks, in fact some of them may already be growing legs, and very soon they'll be hopping out of the pools and going climbing into the bushes and stuff to hunker down. As it dries out, starts to get hot, they'll find a gopher hole or a crack in the mud and they'll burrow in. And the spadefoot toad is actually called the spadefoot toad because it has a spade on its foot that it uses to dig. And so it'll create this hole that it buries itself in the ground. So you come out here in the summer and you see the cracked mud in these pools, and in those cracks it's actually full of toads. So they're just waiting, they just hang out.
Do predators go after them?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. But probably more so at this time of year. Sometimes we come out and there's garter snakes in the vernal pools eating the tadpoles. You see a little tadpole. But all the calling is their mating calls.
Okay.
The frog's going, hey baby.
I'm over here.
This area here is the coastal sage scrub, and you can see the difference. Up on the harder, exposed sandstone is the chaparral, the darker material, and then down in the flats where it's sandier is the sage scrub. And the main plant that kind of defines the sage scrub is California sagebrush. Pass that around. Take a whiff. So you walk through it, it's just this fantastic, aromatic area. And so this is a really rare ecosystem now because, for example, the entire Los Angeles plain is covered in this habitat. There's none left there now. So all of the places that were like flat and gentle on the coast, it was pretty much the whole plain. It was grasslands and sage scrub, but this was a major part of what was down in those flat areas. And so it just, it's the vegetation that was in the best places to build in Southern California. So there's a number of endangered species that live in the sage scrub. One is the California gnatcatcher. That's, people know that one. It's kind of the spotted owl with the sage scrub. It has actually, yeah. And another one is the California or San Diego cactus wren. This is a thrasher that's calling. You can see it perched up on the tree up there. Hummingbird is going to sit by.
That's just a good question. What is sage? The topology makes some places hard to build.
Sometimes.
But
But this,
once you use the binoculars, you can get a really good look at
the
that.
reason this is here is all because of environmental rules. It became increasingly difficult for developers to build, and it ended up being this huge negotiation.
They're right up here around the
It depends on the year, the rainfall, the temperature, when the toads hatch. It's just so many factors. Sometimes you don't have that many toads in a pool and it dries up and it rains again and the fairy shrimp will do another hatch. So it totally depends.
A little closer, you can see
What are you looking at?
a little thing just spinning around. They're like the head of a pin something. Yeah.
Yeah, you can kind of see them moving around in there.
Oh, wow.
If you just look in there, there's little black swimming things. That actually looks like a little tadpole.
Uh-huh.
If you look in just the little grass or the, I don't know if that's duckweed or what that is, but the aquatic plant. If you look in there, there's some little like black dot things moving around. Oh, I do see some little things that might just little invertebrates.
Oh, yeah, I do see that. That's amazing. They're so tiny.
Yeah.
Wow.
That might be the other species, Ben.
Talking to them on a flower, and it turns out that there's this whole universe that lives, right in this teeny spot, like the size of a pinhead. And we actually have something like that for real right here on Carmel Mountain, and it's called the living soil crust. It has all sorts of different names, as microbiotic soils or cryptogamic crust, but it's just living soils. And what it is all of these different, really primitive plant species that have evolved over time to grow in these open areas and form this carpet. So if you look right here, you can see moss and liverworts and all sorts of cool, teeny, tiny little plants that are growing in this layer across the soil top. And it's really important for the ecology because it protects it. It's like laying out a giant sponge over the whole landscape. So when it rains, instead of the water eroding like is happening in this trail, it just soaks it up and protects the soil. And it's also very fragile this time of year. This is why it's important for mountain bikers to be aware, horse people, even walkers, because if you step on it, it crushes it. It's so delicate this time of year. It's a little bit less delicate when it's dry, but even then it can be damaged. So that's why it's so important to stay on trails, because there's this whole world of plants and little tiny insects and stuff that live only on those soil crusts. You see, if you go to, has anyone ever been to like Arches National Park or, in Utah, they have big signs, don't bust the crust. And they have like pictures of boots coming down on it, and it's much more visible there because you have the stark sandstone area and the crust is very black and it grows to be very tall, like this.
Are we going to go on that trail?
No, not that way. But here it's a little bit more subtle and people don't know as much about it here. And that's getting rarer and rarer in San Diego and elsewhere in California because we're getting too much wildfire now. So chaparral at one time was evolved with fire, but it was evolved in a way it's like you own a home and you own homeowner's insurance that has fire policy on it. You're happy that you have the fire insurance after you burn, but you don't necessarily want your house to burn. That's basically the way the chaparral works. It's like it'll survive if it burns, but not too often. It's not necessarily super happy about it, but it has adaptations to come back and recover after it burns. So as you may hear sometimes, the chaparral needs to burn. It needs to burn as much as your house needs to burn. It just doesn't. And so there's plants and animals that are adapted to recover from fire. But what's happening now with people, you get car fires on the freeway, you get the cigarette butt tossed out of the car, you get kids playing with matches. All those things happen too frequently now and start too many fires. So we've gone from a fire regime where chaparral like this would burn at most once every 30 or 50 years to as much as like 300 to 500 years, a long period of time that go without fire and it's fine. But now you get places that are just burning every 3 years, every 5 years. Like a huge area that burned in 2007 in the Witch Fire had burned just a couple years earlier in the Cedar Fire. Thousands and thousands of acres that are just getting hit too hard. And it causes that disturbance we talked about, which then introduces the weeds. So the weeds can take over and spread and outcompete the chaparral. So that's one of the things that's so special about Carmel Mountain is that it hasn't burned too often. It's lucky for how many people surround it. And soil plant. There's wild cucumber. You see that big mat that's growing over the plant there? It's a vine that grows up from the ground from a root. It spends most of the year dormant as that root, but when it rains, it sends out a big vine to cover everything. This is lemonade berry. Here's something interesting. So we're on coastal San Diego near the ocean. There's Mojave yucca from the desert. It just grows here and it grows in the desert. And what it likes about this maritime climate and the desert, I have no idea. Rocky sandstone, and this is that limbistic sandstone. On top of that, it has to be kind of seeping. It has to be water seeping out, so it's moist still. So there's all these really specialized conditions that over millions of years have decided that, like, so it's this right here.
Most obvious. How big are those little fairy shrimp if you could see them?
About the size of my pinky fingernail, and they're translucent, so they're really hard to see. You stare at it, and then they kind of you just start.
Some of these little teeny ones under a microscope look like horseshoe crabs. But
That's pretty. Especially what's
What is that?
you see a little track here?
Don't step on it. Right there. It's called salmon.
Go back a couple hundred years. What was this landscape like? What animals lived here? Can anybody guess what the biggest animal was that was here 200 years ago?
Gray fox.
Keep going.
Holy mountain.
Not quite. California grizzly bear,
Oh my God.
right here. So they were a Southern California animal, and in fact, they were some of the biggest grizzly bears known in North America. And there's, like early settlers' accounts of seeing them on what's now Camp Pendleton. So people actually wrote about, I was out checking the cows today and ran into a grizzly bear on what's now Camp Pendleton. And that's just right up there. So they were here. There wasn't that many of them, though, so they were killed off really quickly, really early by the Spanish, and then soon after the white settlers that came in. But they would come to the ocean, they'd feed on dead whale carcasses. There was California condors that were here that would come down and feed on whales. There's accounts of that in California. So there was some really incredible big stuff that just there hasn't been room for as people have filled up all the spaces. But we're really lucky that there's still some of these things that are really special and left here today, even if it takes that getting down close to appreciate it. So it just makes San Diego's an incredible place, and this to me just adds to that beauty of this place. It's so special to have all of these plants and animals that still exist here that we can live with and enjoy. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.